Quadratic formula! Okay, that's quadratic formula, but if you wanted to do factoring instead, here's how you would do factoring. You would still subtract 15, you would still get this, you would still get 2x squared plus 7x minus 15 equals 0. But to factor it, normally you would look for something that multiplied to negative 15 and adds up to 7. But there is a 2 in front, and it is not a greatest common factor. That means you have to use the AC method, where you use 2 times negative 15 to put in the bottom of this thing, which is negative 30. 2, 15, 30. So what multiplies to 30 and adds up to 7? Well, maybe it's 1 and 30, except it's not. Maybe it's 2 and 15, except it's not. Maybe it's 3 and 10. It is 3 and 10. Other things it could have been was 5 and 6, but it is not 5 and 6. It is 3 and 10. We do want it to be a positive 7, though. So it looks like it's going to have to be 10 minus 3 is 7. 10 minus 3. And at the same time, they do multiply to negative 30. So there we go. So minus 3x plus 10x. If you want, you can write it the other way. It won't make a difference. You could do 10x and minus 3x. You'll get the same answer in the end. But what you do now is you keep this the same, the 2x squared, but the 7 is going to split into the minus 3x plus 10x. Minus 15. So the 7 gets split into the minus 3 plus 10 x's from the numbers that we found over here. And then you do factor by grouping, where you group the first two and you group the last two and you pull out some GCFs and you have a good old time. So 2 and 3 have nothing in common, but they do both have x's here. So you can pull out an x. And if you take away an x from each of these, you'll have a 2x minus 3. From 10 and 15, it looks like 5 goes into both of them. So pull out a positive 5. And then if you divide these by 5, 10 divided by 5 is 2. And then 15 divided by 5 is 3. So you get 2x minus 3. Whatever. Okay. And then you'll notice that these two things match, and they will always match. The 2x minus 3's match, so I'll write down 2x minus 3. And then the outside stuff, the x and the plus 5, makes up the other parenthesis. And those are the two things you get. And then, as before, you set them equal to 0. So 2x minus 3 equals 0, or x plus 5 equals 0. If you add 3, you get 2x equals 3. If you subtract 5, you get x equals negative 5, which is solved. And here you would divide by 2 to get x equals 3 over 2. Which, doesn't that look familiar? Ooh, that's right. Same answers, different technique. And there you go. All right. I did want to show you factoring second in this one, because number 8 you have to factor. So I figured putting it on the same video would be good. And you're actually starting on the second step in this question rather than the first, because the first one was 3 terms and you have to do A times C. This one is 4 terms. It is already good to go for factor by grouping. But anytime there are 4 terms, look for a GCF. There is none. And then you can factor by grouping the first 2 and the last 2, like so. And it is equal to 0 already. Always double check that. So from here, they both have an x, but even more, they both have 2 x's in common. So you can pull out an x squared. And if you pull out an x squared, you'll have a single x left. And if you take out this x squared, all that's left is this minus 3. Here, 16 and 48, the biggest number that goes into them is 16. 16 does actually go into 48. If you didn't know that and like accidentally pulled out a 4 or something, you would just see that the parentheses don't match. Because remember, I'm going to have something here and then an x minus 3. There's no way around that. They have to match. So if you pulled out a 4, you would see that this was a 12 instead of a 3. And be like, oh, that must be wrong or something. And you would go back and double check. And it does turn out that you can pull out a 16, or more specifically, a negative 16. So you pull out a minus 16. And sure enough, 16 times 3 is 48. So this does match out, right? A negative 16 times a negative 3 makes a positive 48. So you get x squared minus 16. And then the x minus 3 that they have in common. And it's now factored. At this point, you actually do have two options. You could set them equal to 0, which I guess I'll do. X squared minus 16 equals 0, or x minus 3 equals 0. This will just be 3. This one, if you add 16, you get x squared equals 16. And then you have to square root both sides. And this is where you have to be careful, because you get x equals, but please do not forget the answer is not just 4. Because you square rooted both sides, it's a plus or minus 4, which means there's 3 answers: 4, negative 4, and 3. 4, negative 4, and 3. 3 total answers here. Because as I said, this is one way to do it. The other way is that x squared minus 16 is factorable. It is a difference of squares. You can square root both of them. And when you factor by difference of squares, if the square root of 16 is 4, then you put a 4 in both of them, but one's a plus and one's a minus. That is factoring difference of squares. 1 plus, 1 minus, take the square root. And from there, you could see you get negative 4 and positive 4. So 2 ways, but you get the same answer. This is safer because it's more easy to get both numbers. This one, you have to remember the plus or minus. They're both equally correct, so it's up to you in terms of which one you want to do. There you go. Number 9. I personally don't like negative numbers, so I would move everything to the other side, but I'm sure most of you who have worked on this problem have subtracted 3, which is equally fine. If you're doing this, I wouldn't factor, because you can. Maybe I'm wrong to say you shouldn't factor. You can still factor it and get the right answer. You could still use quadratic formula. Either one of them I think works. I'm going to do quadratic formula because I like practice with it. So there you go. A is negative 2. B is 5. C is negative 3. So negative b, because the quadratic formula, I guess I'll write it again, negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. As Pop Goes the Weasel. You can sing this formula to Pop Goes the Weasel, in case you didn't know. The more you know. So negative b plus or minus square root symbol b squared. So what's b squared? 25 minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. (25 minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 3 is 1. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4, so I wrote that there. But the square root of 1 is just 1. So you can split this into two things. I didn't organize it like this before, but this is basically what I'm doing. I'm doing a negative 5 plus 1 over 4 and a negative 5 minus 1 over 4. And if you simplify those, negative 5 plus 1 is negative 4. And negative 5 minus 1 is negative 6. And if you simplify those again, negative 4 over 4 is negative 1. And 6 over 4 simplifies to negative 3 over 2. And those are the two answers you would get. Since they're fractions and whole numbers or integers, that means this was factorable. I just didn't factor it because I didn't feel like it at the moment. Greatest reason ever. Next, this is a difference of squares. It is factorable. Please do not add 16 to both sides and then square root or fourth root, whatever you think it is supposed to be. Because it is a 4 and not a 2, you can't do that. If this was a 2, by all means, add 16, square root both sides, plus or minus, and done. But it doesn't work that way with the fourth, because as it turns out, we're going to end up with two imaginary answers. So here we go. Difference of squares, square root both parts. I believe we can agree the 16 square root is 4. One is a plus, one is a minus. That's always the case. The square root of x to the 4, when you're square rooting exponents, the trick is you half it. So half of 4 is 2, so this will be x squared. So if this was an x6, it would have been an x3. You always take that and divide it by 2 for exponents. Then you can take each of these and set it equal to 0. Technically, the right side is factorable, but I'm choosing not to do that way here. Add 4. Subtract 4, like so. So subtract 4, you get negative 4. Add 4, you get 4. Square root both sides. Now, because it's a negative number, that means you can make it positive and put an I. But also there is a square root of 4. The square root of 4 is 2. So you write the number 2. I said there was an I, so I'll put an I. And then there's that thing that I warned you that you should do and might forget, and therefore you should do the factor thing maybe instead, and that is you need a plus or minus sign. So you get x equals plus or minus 2i. Whereas over here, when you do it with the plus or minus, you just get the square root of 4 is 2, so plus or minus 2. So those are technically 4 answers: 2i, negative 2i, 2, and negative 2. But if you write it like this, that's absolutely fine. Okay, that completes this page of the review. And hopefully I can get it done in 2. Oh, that ain't happening. Hopefully I can get it done in 3 more episodes. Wish me luck, guys. Woo! See you in a bit.